Westeros is a world of dragons, wars, and betrayals, but some of its customs are even more disturbing than the battles themselves. These aren't just customs that were cruel. They were outlawed, feared, or whispered about in secret. Rituals that crossed every moral line, practices that turned stomachs, and traditions so twisted they made even hardened lords say, "This has gone too far." Today we're diving into the weirdest and most disturbing customs in Westeros, the ones that prove the real horror of Game of Thrones wasn't the war. It was the world itself. Let's start this list with the first night, probably the most infamous custom of all. This tradition states that when small folk marry, their lord or king has the privilege of bedding the bride on the first night. The practice is an ancient one, believed to be 10,000 years old. It began with the first men of the Dawn Age who valued only strength and bravery. It was considered a blessing for a warlord or hero to bestow his seed upon a bride on her wedding night, and if a child came from such a union, the husband would have the honor of raising the hero's offspring. This tradition survived even after the coming of the Andals from Andalos, despite the fact that the Andals themselves did not practice the first night. After the conquest, King Aegon I Targaryen allowed the High Lords to retain both the right of pit and gallows and the right of the first night. During the reign of King Jaehaerys I Targaryen, Queen Alysanne Targaryen overheard numerous stories involving the first night in her women's courts. The most disturbing came from a girl in a brothel at Molestown in 58 AC. She was the daughter of a blacksmith, wed to her father's apprentice at the age of 14. Just as they finished their marriage vows, their local lord arrived at the wedding with his men-at-arms to claim his right. After the first night, she was returned to her husband, who lost all affection for her. Unable to raise his hand against the lord, the husband raised it against his wife instead. When he discovered she was pregnant with the lord's child, the apprentice beat her until she miscarried. The woman decided that if she was going to be called a whore, she might as well live like one, and fled to the Molestown brothel where she remained. Alysanne declared that the law was not the same as it had been when it was founded thousands of years earlier, as none of the men practicing it now were mighty heroes. The council agreed to abolish the custom. However, some houses in the Seven Kingdoms, such as the Boltons and the Umbers, though they deny it, as well as the inhabitants of Skagos and certain northern mountain clans, are rumored to still illicitly uphold the first night. At Lord Tywin Lannister's wedding to Lady Joanna Lannister, King Aerys II Targaryen, also known as the Mad King, drunkenly joked that it was a pity the first night had been banned, and he took certain liberties during the bedding ritual when the men at the feast were required to disrobe the bride. Ramsay Snow was later born to a miller's wife impregnated by Lord Roose Bolton, who had the miller hanged for marrying without his permission. We continue this list with the Ironborn custom of paying the iron price. The iron price is a core concept in Ironborn culture and their religion dedicated to the drowned god. Paying the iron price means seizing something from those one has defeated, rather than paying or trading for it. It is a fundamental aspect of the old way, the traditional Ironborn lifestyle. The opposite of this is the gold price, paying for possessions, which is considered shameful for a man to do. Here is a quote from Theon Greyjoy that perfectly captures the Ironborn mentality. In the old way, only women decorated themselves with ornaments bought with coin. A warrior wore only the jewelry he took off the corpses of enemies slain by his own hand. Paying the iron price, it was called. When Theon Greyjoy returns home, his father, Lord Balon Greyjoy, points to the gold chain clasp on his cloak and asks whether he paid the gold price or the iron price, whether he bought it or took it from a defeated enemy. In Ironborn culture, shaped by raiding and conquest, only such possessions earn respect. When Theon admits he paid for the chain, Balon rips it off and throws it into the fire, declaring that he would not have one of his own dressed like a whore. He scolds Theon for forgetting their customs during his time away, and expresses regret that the Starks have made Theon theirs. We continue this list with the guest right, one of the oldest customs, one that applies not only in Westeros but in Essos as well. Guest right is a sacred law of hospitality. When a guest, whether common-born or noble, eats the food and drinks the drink from a host's table beneath the host's roof, guest right is invoked. Once invoked, neither the guest may harm the host, nor the host harm the guest, for the duration of the guest's stay. The legend that gave birth to this custom is shared by Bran in the fourth book. The rat cook had cooked the son of the Andal King in a big pie with onions, carrots, mushrooms, lots of pepper and salt, a rasher of bacon, and a dark red Dornish wine. Then he served him to his father, who praised the taste and had a second slice. Afterward, the gods transformed the cook into a monstrous white rat who could only eat his own young. He roamed the night fort ever since, devouring his children, but still his hunger was not sated. It was not for murder that the gods cursed him, Old Nan said, nor for serving the Andal king his son in a pie. A man has a right to vengeance, but he slew a guest beneath his roof, and that the gods cannot forgive. People place great importance on this unspoken law. Meister Egbert wrote about northern violations of guest right, injustice, and injustice in the north. Judgments of 3 Stark lords, stating that only kinslaying was considered an equivalent crime. This shows just how seriously this law was taken. The guest law itself is very simple. If you are a guest and the host offers you bread and salt, and you accept it, the host is bound to offer you protection until your stay ends. We see this law applied several times throughout the series, for example when Mance Rayder agrees to protect Jon Snow as a guest beyond the wall. But we also see it broken in what is arguably the most cowardly act in the entire series: the Red Wedding. Here is how the conversation in the book unfolds before the tragedy. My lord, Catelyn had almost forgotten. Some food would be most welcome. We have ridden many leagues in the rain. Walder Frey's mouth moved in and out. Food, hey? A loaf of bread, a bite of cheese, mayhaps a sausage. Some wine to wash it down, Robb said. And salt. Bread and salt. Of course, of course. The old man clapped his hands together and servants came into the hall, bearing flagons of wine and trays of bread, cheese, and butter. Lord Walder took a cup of red himself and raised it high with a spotted hand. My guests, he said, my honored guests, be welcome beneath my roof and at my table. We thank you for your hospitality, my lord, Robb replied. Edmure echoed him along with the Grachan, Sir Mark Piper, and the others. They drank his wine and ate his bread and butter. Catelyn tasted the wine and nibbled at some bread and felt much the better for it. Now we should be safe, she thought. And then the disaster happened. Even the Lannisters were not pleased that Robb Stark met his end in such a way. But let's move on to some strange customs from Essos. We saw part of Daenerys and Khal Drogo's wedding, and if you thought what we saw was strange, you haven't even witnessed the wildest Dothraki traditions. Take weddings, for example. In Dothraki culture, if no one dies during a wedding, it is considered a dull affair. The more blood that is shed, the more successful the wedding is believed to be. Another particularly disturbing Dothraki custom appears in the first season of the series when Daenerys eats a horse's heart. The stallion heart ritual states that during a pregnancy ceremony, a pregnant Khaleesi must eat the raw heart of a stallion in front of a Dothraki gathering. It is meant to be a display of strength, endurance, and destiny. The final custom I want to address is perhaps the most extreme of all. When a Khal dies, his blood riders are expected to kill themselves so they may serve him in the afterlife. Loyalty taken to its absolute extreme. If you thought the Night's Watch laws were unfair to the men who joined their ranks, wait until you hear about their female counterpart, the Silent Sisters. They are a religious order of women within the Faith of the Seven, sworn to the service of the stranger, the aspect of the Seven that represents death. The Silent Sisters are responsible for dressing and preparing the dead for funeral rites. They are called silent because they have sworn vows of silence. The Silent Sisters are not considered septas or female priests. Instead, they form a separate, all-female monastic order. While technically all clergy of the Faith of the Seven take vows of celibacy, the Silent Sisters are regarded as even more devoted to chastity and purity. Their vow of silence removes them almost entirely from worldly interaction. More than septons or septas, the Silent Sisters are seen as especially consecrated and inviolate. They wear cowls that cover their heads and veils that conceal their entire faces, except for their eyes. To signify their holy status, they wear elaborate back braces displaying the seven-pointed star, the sacred symbol of the Faith of the Seven. Next, we move on to the Salt Wife system. Ironborn culture allows men to take one rock wife, their legal wife, and multiple salt wives, women captured during raids. While only children born of a rock wife are considered trueborn, the children of salt wives hold a higher status than bastards. However, this custom is not exclusive to Ironborn culture. We see a similar version beyond the Wall. Among the free folk, there are no formal marriage ceremonies. A man is considered married to a woman if he can successfully steal her, fight off her resistance, and consummate the relationship. Have you ever wondered which house is the most sadistic in Westeros? The answer is House Bolton, something you may have already guessed from Ramsay Bolton's portrayal in the show. But did you know that skinning enemies alive was once an official Bolton house practice? The practice of flaying is notoriously associated with House Bolton, an ancient northern house descended from the first men and dating back to the Age of Heroes. Their obsession was so complete that they adopted a flayed man as their sigil. Members of the house are fond of saying, "A naked man has few secrets, a flayed man, none." The Boltons were rumored to go so far as to wear the skins of their executed enemies as cloaks, and even display them in a secret chamber within their ancestral seat, the Dreadfort. They supposedly abandoned these practices when they bent the knee to House Stark and became their vassals. Nevertheless, rumors persisted that the tradition continued in secret, while their ancient saying was still taught to Bolton children. We end this list with a custom practiced in Qarth, one of the wealthiest and most exotic cities in A Song of Ice and Fire. Qarth has a tradition in which noblewomen leave one breast exposed as part of their fashion and social customs. This is not considered scandalous or sexual within Qarth. Instead, it symbolizes status, confidence, and power. Daenerys Targaryen herself adopts this custom after she conquers the city. With this, we conclude our list of the 10 weirdest customs in Game of Thrones. Which one shocked you the most? And if you know an even wilder custom, feel free to share it in the comments.